Our treasurer. He's a litigation partner at Blake Castles in Graydon, practices in media law as well as commercial litigation. He's been on a counsel on a number of major charter cases, including issues with freedom of expression and equality rights. He has served as our treasurer, but also serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, Director of Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Journalism Foundation, and the Osgood Society. And perhaps most notably, with perhaps the government's assistance, he will be the very last treasurer of the Law Society of Upper Canada and the first treasurer of the Law Society of Ontario. So without further ado, Paul Schabas.
I was very relieved tonight to hear that Mike was not going to introduce me. But I was very touched last year, and in fact I asked him to send me a copy of it, which he did, and it was very memorable. But thank you very much, Bill, for that shorter but equally warm and gracious introduction. I want to start by acknowledging, as I always do at all Law Society events, that we are on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and to recognize the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples with whom we share the land. And I always pause on that when I say that, because I don't think that should become a rote sort of statement. I think it's something that whenever we hear that, we should pause and reflect on community and sharing, and the community and society that we live in, the history of our treatment of First Nations, and the need to reach out and reconcile with them. And in fact, yesterday we held our Law Society Remembrance Day ceremony in the building, and there were two memorable things about it. One was that we honored all of the law students who had gone to the Second World War and died. And we used to call out their names and say, "not called," or "never called." And this year we actually, with the help of Patrick Shea, who's a lawyer at Gowlings and who has done incredible work on this, we invited their families to come, and we gave them, each of them, a special call to the bar. And we had a display about each one in this room and a reception afterwards. It was incredibly moving. We did the same thing for First World War students a few years ago. But the other thing related to the traditional territory is that yesterday was National Aboriginal Veterans Day, and so we also noted the fact of the thousands and thousands of Indigenous peoples who have fought for Canada and lost their lives for Canada in the wars for well over a century, and we wanted to mark that as well. So I want to thank Jay for hosting me at her table. I feel, I know it's my dinner, but it's really your dinner. And to thank Mike and everybody here for coming here, and I gather you're having a very productive day. We've had an interesting couple of days at the Law Society, because it seems like just about every day is interesting at the Law Society these days. There's a lot going on. The name of change was mentioned. We're confronting a lot of tough issues at the Law Society, and I believe that we should be confronting those issues. The world is changing, Ontario is changing, the profession is changing, the delivery of legal services is changing, and probably will change in remarkable ways over the next decade or so, in ways that probably none of us can even anticipate. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to tell you about a few of the issues that we're confronting, most of which will be familiar to you, but and probably none of them are without controversy either. And I know there'll be a lot of strong views, and if you want, I'm happy to take questions at the end of it. I'm not going to talk about everything, but let me talk for a moment actually about the name change, because I'm not sure we did the best job we could have done in explaining how that came about and in what the information was on which we based it and why we did it. One of our strategic priorities that we set a little over 2 years ago after the last Bencher election, when we had a a detailed strategic planning process, incredibly detailed strategic planning process, and resulted in setting 5 or 6 major priorities, and one of them is communications. The sense that we need to reach out to the public. We need to become more relevant to the public. And so when I got elected treasurer, I said, what are we doing on that? And we had some communications consultants, and we gave them some direction and said, go out and really figure out how we're perceived by the public at large. How do we raise our profile? Do they know what we do? Do they know what lawyers do? Do they know what paralegals do? Do they know how to reach us? Do they know how to access legal information? And the answers to those questions were not very good. Not terribly surprisingly, but we actually, we conducted public opinion surveys, focus groups, and so on. And one of the conclusions they came back with in saying there's lots of things you can do to improve here, but one of the things they also said was your name is a barrier. People don't understand the name, they don't get the name, they don't understand what Upper Canada is. Those who do think it's some club or something, and kind of looks like one, and we like that part of it, and we're not changing those things, let's be clear. That was something we said we've got to fix that. And we also did consult with the profession. We also did surveys of the profession about a lot of issues around how we're perceived. And we knew that the profession was divided on that issue, pretty much down the middle on whether the name was suitable or not suitable, or a bunch sort of said they didn't really care one way or the other, which is hardly a ringing endorsement. And we knew that they were split, and we said, well, we've got to listen to the public on this. And so we have changed the name. We took a couple of months. We had an identity crisis for a month while we decided we weren't going to be Upper Canada, and then had to think about what we would be, and that was why we sent out that survey. But I'm convinced that this is another step forward. My joke about the name change is this, that the problem was that we were Upper Canada for about maybe at most 50 years, from 1790 to 1841. Think about that, 1841, that's 26 years before Confederation. But then we struggled. We went through a couple of other names. We were Canada West, we were the United Canada, and then Confederation came along, and we became Ontario, and I think we were up with, well, how long's that going to last? So I think we felt that after 150 years with one name, we could safely adopt the name Ontario. So the name is actually symbolic of bigger changes. You're going to be hearing about a communications plan that we're going to be rolling out over the next few months and over the next year or so to make ourselves much more relevant to the public, so they know more about what we as a profession do, and can reach us and access us. So it fits into a lot of things around themes that we are addressing too, around access to justice. And I'm quite excited about that. I think it's one way among many in which we are raising our profile, which I guess leads me to something else that's raised our profile a lot in the last few weeks, which is our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusiveness Initiative. I'm sure I spoke to you last year about the report of the working group on challenges faced by racialized licensees, and many of you will have been aware of the debate we had almost a year ago exactly, on those recommendations and how they were passed unanimously by the benchers, which was based on real findings around challenges faced by racialized lawyers in getting into the profession and advancing in the profession, and the conclusion that there was systemic racism in the profession. Doesn't mean there's deliberate racism, but systemic racism, and the fact that we do not reflect the population of Ontario, and the feeling that that too is not in the public interest, that we have to be more open, we have to be more inclusive, and we have to better reflect our population so that we can better serve our population in the public interest. And of course, we had a tangible example of that for those of us who read the Globe and Mail on Saturday, with the story of the woman, the black student going to Bay Street and then leaving Bay Street, and the challenges she faced. And it's hard for many of us, and I look around this room, there aren't too many diverse faces, it's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of those who look different than us, and the challenges they face in getting into the profession, and the need for us to take robust steps to respond to that. And I was really proud of the benchers a year ago when we voted unanimously, 3 abstentions. It's a unanimous vote in favor of a lot of robust recommendations that seemed to me to show that we were all willing to show leadership in this area. And I know there's been pushback in the last few weeks as we unrolled a couple of the implementations to this, one of which is the Statement of Principles. That was part and is part of the strategy of accelerating a shift, a cultural shift, accelerating awareness of the issue amongst us as lawyers and as paralegals. It's not a big onerous obligation. We've sent you templates. You can write your own. I know there's a debate around forced speech, but we are a regulated profession, and this is part of a broader initiative, which I would urge all of us to continue to reflect on what is our goal here, which is to make us an inclusive, diverse profession that reflects the population. There are motions. We're going to have some more discussion. We had lengthy discussion this afternoon about this and about the issues we're hearing from you and hearing from others. And I would just say, and I've been saying this a lot in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to continue to say it, we're going to have that discussion. We're going to have a very respectful discussion around this one issue about the Statement of Principles, but our goals remain firm and strong, that we are on the right track in making the professions more inclusive and more diverse, and we are on the right track in being proactive in that regard. So let me turn to another one which is somewhat related to it, and I've already touched on it a little bit, which is Indigenous issues. I'm really proud, too, of what we're doing on the Indigenous front. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued a couple of calls to action specifically directed at the legal profession. Only 2, surprisingly perhaps, but there they are, and we are responding to them. I think we are leading the way in Canada in our responses on Indigenous issues. We have an Indigenous advisory group, which includes Indigenous lawyers and elders who work with our equity committee every month. They meet on their own as well. They talk about what we should be doing to reflect Indigenous values, Indigenous culture, Indigenous laws. We passed in June an Indigenous framework, which is kind of like an Indigenous lens through which we examine everything that we do at the Law Society, so that we can be focused on that and make sure that we are better understanding the issues that they face, and that our values and the steps we take can be inclusive of them and reflect the need for reconciliation. And that includes things like enhancing our cultural competency, enhancing their access to justice. These are important steps. And we're doing that in other ways too. We've created an Indigenous specialist certification. So, many of you may be a specialist in civil litigation or in criminal law or in real estate, and there's a number of others, family law. We've now established the competencies and qualifications to obtain a certificate that tells people that you have both cultural and legal competence to address Indigenous issues, because that's a real challenge for all of us. And it's perhaps the most revealing thing that I've experienced in the last 17 months. So it's 17, I'm starting to count the days down now. I think I've got 7 months to go. So what does that mean, Diana? I've got 7.5 months or so left. The most extraordinary thing for me has been the experience and connection with Indigenous issues and the challenges we have there. And we've established a review panel as well, which includes benchers, and again, the co-chairs of our advisory group, to look at how we deal with Indigenous issues in our regulatory process at the Law Society, to look at how we deal with complaints, how we deal with investigations, how we deal with prosecutions, how our tribunal deals with them, And believe me, very few people in this room, if any, in my view, can really say they have the competencies and the understanding to address those issues right now. We don't really have it at the Law Society, and that's something we're looking hard at. And to help us in that, I actually engaged Ovid Mercredi. It's a name that will be known to many of you, the famous first chief of the Assembly of First Nations many years ago, a retired lawyer, who is working with us in northwestern Ontario to reach out to residential school survivors and others whom we failed when they've complained about how they've been represented and how our processes have worked. And so we're working hard with him to better understand how we need to change our methods and our procedures. Excuse me. So I think, so I got two more quick topics. Family law reform. I was talking earlier to Sonia about this because everyone wants to know what's happening with the Boncalo report. Our Access to Justice Committee has been looking at that carefully. There will be some recommendations that will be coming forward in the next days, I think, on that. We are going to be making some recommendations that deal with things that she has recommended. It's going to be an incremental look. We want to deal with this carefully, and we're continuing to look at those issues. But nothing. I think it's fair to say it's going to be an incremental approach to that, because really, as we see it, there are a lot of issues around family law. It's not just about representation in family law. I've made several trips to Ottawa to urge the federal government to create unified family courts across the province. We're still working on that. You can imagine the challenges with getting that at the top of the Minister of Justice's list these days. Her list is even longer than mine, of course, and more challenging perhaps, but we have to look more broadly at family law, just as we have to look at a lot of things we do on access to justice. It's not in my script, but when I mention we can't imagine how law is going to change, a few weeks ago I was listening to the bâtonnier of the barreau in Quebec, my counterpart. He's this 38-year-old dynamic guy, and all he wants to tell us about is artificial intelligence, and saying, get ready. And he's right. And I don't know what it is, but who does? I'm not sure he does either. Well, the artificial intelligence knows what it is, I think. But these are the changes that we're confronting. Lastly, I'll just mention Learn. I know that Diana Miles, our acting Chief Executive Officer, who certainly has her hands full these days, is going to be speaking to you about Learn in some detail tomorrow. I know this is of much interest. I want to reiterate that I, personally, and the Law Society are committed to ensuring that we all continue to provide ready access to legal information for all lawyers and paralegals, that we regard this as vitally important to our mandate to ensure that all of us are able to provide competent legal assistance to our clients. And we're working, I think, very well with you to identify ways of evolving the provision of legal information and library services to Law Society members. And because we're seeing the same thing, of course, as we know. People don't use libraries in the same ways that they did in the past. Librarians do different kinds of jobs. Legal information is available in many different ways. And I've been at a number of, I think, very productive meetings with Jay and Michael and other representatives of your association. And I think it's fair to say we all share the same objectives. And I'm really pleased with the collaborative progress we've made. So that's, I probably talked too long. That's all from me. As I say, I guess it's my dinner. If you want to ask me questions, go ahead until Jay gets up and cuts me off. Are there any questions people want to take on, or do you want to just get to the hospitality suite? No? Then I'll sit down. Thank you very much.
Thanks very
very much.
Can I sit down?
Nope. Nope, you got to stay here. Are we sure there's no questions? No, I'm just kidding. I've been given the honor of thanking Treasurer Schabas for coming tonight, for addressing us, and more than that, I think, for his efforts on all of our behalf. There are obviously times when FOLA, which is an organization dedicated, as you know, Treasurer, to trying to make sure that in addition to providing access to justice, that the lawyers who are out there providing that access to justice are able to make a living and do well and be successful and as a result provide that service. And there's a constant balancing that goes on between the Law Society and FOLA. I was very pleased earlier in talking with the Treasurer, and I think you will appreciate this, that we've been striking the right balance, and I think that's a credit to you and the staff at the Law Society and to FOLA as well. You may not know this, but apparently the Treasurer keeps a aggravation list. And so I want all of you to know, on behalf of your FOLA executive, that the Treasurer was quite clear that FOLA is on that list.
Wouldn't want it any other way, would you?
No, exactly. But I think it's also insightful that he went out of his way to say, but you're not at the top of the list. So that's where we want to be, Treasurer. We want to be on that list. We want to make sure that our voice is being heard, and I think it is. And I think, when we reach out and we ask to speak about topics that are of interest to the practicing bar, we always get a receptive listening. Don't always do what we want, but you're getting there. It's too bad. Unfortunately, there's only 7 months left, and then we'll have to train somebody new. But we really do appreciate you coming to this, coming out to Brampton last year, to being available, to sitting down and actually listening and considering the issues. And rather than provide a gift, you may know that in past years, FOLA's had a tradition of trying to do something on a charitable note for speakers, including the Treasurer, and so we're going to make a donation to Lawyers Feed the Hungry as a thank you. Can we talk about the hospitality suite? Okay. I've also got the task of making sure that I tell you all the hospitality suite has been restocked. It's ready to receive you. It's hopefully where you'll get a chance to make new friends, make acquaintances, share your good stories and your bad stories and your gripes and your thoughts on today and tomorrow and everything that's going on in law. There hasn't been a lot of promotion of this, but I want to make sure you all know that the former Cadelpa, now FOLA tradition of Chinese food will carry on this year. Nathan Baker is now in charge of Chinese. It'll happen tomorrow morning, although it used to happen about 1:15. It'll probably now happen at 12:01 a.m. But there will be a pilgrimage from the hospitality suite to our local Chinese restaurant, where they reserve a private room for FOLA at every plenary. So I hope a number of you will be able to join us there. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you in the hospitality suite.